are many situations that are the opposite of that. There are many situations that are not just terrifying, but are truly dangerous, truly life-threatening. Look back at Psalm 46. Psalm 46, look at verse 2. Let's see what kind of fear we're dealing with here. It says, therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, and though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, and its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at its swelling. So think about this fear. Think about this text. This is not someone popping out from behind a door. This is mountains coming off their foundations. This is, think of Mount Everest sliding off of its base into the sea and causing that sea to foam and roar and have the massive tidal wave that would ensue. This is not a small fear. This is a cataclysmic event. It is, if you pardon me saying so, apocalyptic. It is end of the world. Look at it again. The earth gives way and the mountains moved into the heart of the sea. This reminds me of Revelation. You remember in Revelation chapter 6, verse 12, it says, when he opened the sixth seal, I looked and behold, there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth, and the full moon became like blood, and the stars fell to the earth as the fig tree sheds its winter fruit when shaken by a gale. The sky vanished like a scroll that's being rolled up, and every mountain and island was removed from its place. This is incredible. This is like what the psalmist is talking about. Mountains, earthquakes, tidal waves. And you know what that's like. There are some of you who have this year, last year, this week, you've experienced the tidal wave, the trembling, the cataclysmic trial of some kind that no matter the size of it, it felt absolutely overwhelming to you. And you get hit by that wave. You get hit by that rock. And then you get hit by another one. And you wonder, how am I going to survive? How am I going to make it? Maybe it is you find out you have a tumor and you're wondering if it's cancerous. Maybe it's a phone call about an accident and you're trying to figure out what happened. Maybe it's a report from your job and you're trying to figure out, are you going to get cut? Maybe it is the signs that your spouse is thinking about leaving you and forsaking you. There is catastrophe that has impacted so many of us, and if it hasn't, it is coming. There are moments where it will feel like the earth is melting and moving underneath your feet. And what are you going to do? This psalm wants you to face those moments and not fear. How is that possible? The first way that the psalmist indicates for us to not fear is something that's different than you would expect. You might be tempted to try to downsize the problem, to downplay it. It's really not that bad. It's really going to be okay. That's not what the psalmist does. The psalmist does not look at the size of the problem and try to reduce it. Rather, the psalmist looks at the size of our God and compares the size of our problem, which is massive, to our God, who is even bigger. So there are three things about who God is and what he has done that will hold you up, and not just hold you up, but enable you to look at catastrophe and not be afraid. Here's the first one. Our God is a shelter. Our God is a shelter. You don't have to be afraid because our God is safe. He is a safe shelter. Look at verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear though the earth gives way. Whenever you see a therefore in the Bible, it's a good rule of thumb to ask, what's it there for? What's the connection there? And so the psalmist is saying, the earth is giving way, but you shouldn't fear. Why? Because God is a refuge. He's a shelter. He's a castle. He's a fortress. I don't know about you, but maybe, actually this might be one of the more controversial things I'll say. Some folks think it is completely insane to go camping. So some people, they're like, why would I pretend to be homeless for a season? And why would I go out and subject myself to the elements in a tent when I can stay in my house? And others of you don't understand that, and you're like, why would I not go out and sleep under the stars and under the canopy of God's glory and be out in the wilderness in the nature? So I realize that the room might be divided here, but I've been camping before, and I went with a couple of my friends, and they decided it was a good idea not to use our tent, but instead to build a shelter, a lean-to, if you will. And so they built this apparatus that leaned up against this wire on these trees, and it has gaping holes on each side. And I get to the point where I might have thought they were like still in the process of building the thing. But they're like, all right, we're ready to get it ready for the camp tonight. We're all done. And I look at it, and literally, like, I look out one way, and there's like wilderness. And I look out the other way, and there's like everything in the world. And I'm like, okay, we're gonna sleep in this, and we're like completely exposed to insects and bugs and bobcats and humans. I don't think this is the greatest idea in the world. We survived, it was fine. I don't recommend doing it if you're ever tempted. But that kind of shelter is absolutely pathetic. That is not the kind of shelter you want to be in during a storm, because it will do nothing. God is not like that. God is not like a flimsy shelter. God is a refuge that can withstand anything. God is a shelter like you've never been in. He is a fortress and a castle like you've never seen. And this shelter, it will protect you from any element. It will protect you from any opposition. And the amazing thing about God is he goes with you wherever you are. This shelter is portable. Look at this passage. Look at verse 1. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in time of trouble. He is very present. He is near. So when you go to the oncologist, your shelter's with you. When you face your boss and that conversation to find out if you're going to make it or not, God is there. When you get the word in the phone call or you get the note from your spouse, God won't forsake you. He won't leave you. He is a very present help in time of need. He's not just protecting you, he's with you, and then he's helping you. You know, it would be one thing if he was a shelter that just protects. It's a whole nother thing that he's in the fray with you and me, but it's an additional thing that he helps us. I don't know about you, but maybe you've heard of husbands who aren't very helpful. I've heard about this happening where you the family's around and everyone's cleaning up, and the husband is just sitting there, just watching, distracted, texting, scrolling, daydreaming. He's present, totally there, but very unhelpful. God's not like that. God's not like me. God's not like you. God is not just present, he's helping. He's there to serve, protect, love, and care for. So God is a shelter, and we don't have to fear. But not just that, this leads to the second point. God is your strength. You don't have to fear because God is strong, and God is your strength. Look at verse 1 again. God is your refuge and your strength, a very present help in time of trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains be moved into the heart of the sea, and though its waters roar and foam, and though the mountains tremble at its swelling. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. Verse 5, look at verse 5. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. There is, in the midst of this earthquake and leveling of everything, something emerges. And it is a city. It is the city of God. It's the only thing that stands. It's God's shelter. And these walls are strong. These walls are unfazed by the apocalyptic moment of the earth. Look at verse 4 again. There is a river whose streams make glad the city of God, the holy habitation of the Most High. God is in the midst of her. She shall not be moved. His strength is holding on to you. His strength is protecting you and making you firm so that when the waves of suffering happen, you don't move. Compare this to all the other cities that were decimated. Look at this. Verse 6. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. So earlier, we had in verse 1, you have God being a strength. In verse 2, it says the seas were raging. They were raging and foaming. Here, in this verse, the nations are raging. In verse 2, you have the mountains which are tottering. They're collapsing. Here, you have the nations that are tottering. What does this mean? It might not just be circumstances that might tempt you to fear. As Spencer talked about last Sunday, there is religious opposition that might make you cower. The nations are raging. Psalm 2 says they rage against the Lord and his anointed. There are angry cities, angry nations, geopolitical entities that are at war with God and thereby extension at war with you. And they are not reason to fear. They are not cause for fear. They, in fact, pale in comparison to the Lord. Look at verse 6. The nations rage, the kingdoms totter. He utters his voice. The earth melts. What does God do to help you when the religious opposition or the nations, the ungodly people are raging against you and you're tempted to fear? What does God do? He utters his voice. He doesn't lift a finger. He doesn't need to. That's how strong he is. What does God need to do? What does God need to demonstrate to you to cast away your fears? Here's one. All he has to do is utter his words. Syllables. Syllables will make the enemies of God melt. That's amazing. The first part of this psalm talks about how the earth and the mountains are moving into the sea. Well, here, the one who made the mountains utters his voice and causes them to go quicker. He causes them to melt. Why would you fear the quaking mountains when the God who made the mountains is on your side? God's word in Genesis 1:1, he was there and he created everything with his words. In Hebrews chapter 1 verse 3, it says, he sustains the word by the word of his power. The mountains are there because God made them. The mountains are there because God sustains them. And when God wants to, he melts the mountains because of his word. Our God is strong. And he's stronger than your fears. He's stronger than your enemies. He's stronger than your circumstances. And because of his strength, you don't need to fear. There is a real truth here that runs through the entire Bible. It's not just here in this psalm. Let me read you a couple of other passages. Exodus 15:15. Now there are chiefs of Edom are dismayed, trembling seizes the leaders of Moab, and all the inhabitants of Canaan have melted away. Nahum 1:5. The mountains quake before the Lord, the hills melt, the earth heaves before him, the world and all who dwell in it. With that in mind, look back at Psalm 46 and look at verse 8. Come, behold the works of the Lord, how he has brought desolations on the earth. He makes wars to cease to the end of the earth. He breaks the bow and shatters the spear. He burns the chariots with fire. What weapon will stand against our God? There is none. Every rifle gets plugged. Every spear gets shattered. Every bow gets snapped like a twig. Every attempt at winning a battle against the Lord is brought low, and the chariots are burned with fire. Our God is not afraid of anything, and neither should we. The last point